Hello, and you're joining us here on a brand new episode of Melt. I'm Ritvika Gupta, and on today's episode, we'll be speaking to Richard Edelman to find out what it takes for Indian brands to go global. Anant is here with me. Anant, you spoke to Richard at length about Brand India. And what's concerning is that he said there's a fundamental lack of trust in Indian brands overseas. So why do you think it's so hard for Indian brands to go global?
It's a difficult mountain they have to climb because the perception of Indian-led brands or Indian headquarters brands is very poor across, and that's what we're trying to figure out.
So without giving away too much from the conversation, what do you think are some of the ways in which Indian brands can respond to these challenges?
Well, I think, one of the things Richard speaks about is creation of a hero brand. India needs a hero brand. We've been famous historically for soft parts of the Indian brand. For example, you've had Ayurveda, you've had yoga, stuff like that. Then you've had a non-tangible part of Indian brands, which is, say, the IT power, which is basically people power. But we've not had brands that people go to counters and buy and consume and so on and so forth. So that's what we're trying to navigate over here, whether it's possible for an Indian brand to make it. And the only way, according to Richard, is you have to go out there.
So before we get to the conversation, let's have a look at the Edelman Trust Barometer report. Here are the key findings. There's a 54% gap between domestic and international trust in Indian business. In India's 6 big export markets, namely US, UK, South Korea, UAE, China and Brazil, only 14% of respondents could say with confidence that they had bought a product or service from an Indian company in the last 12 months. And among the same 6 markets, an average of 39% of people could name one Indian brand they would describe as world-class. And in US and UK, it's only 28% and 29% of people respectively. So one of the reasons for this trust deficit is that overseas markets do not know what Indian brands stand for. So why do you think that's happening? Do we lack a voice?
No, it's not so much of a voice. I think it's more historical. There were perceptions that Europe and the US were sort of the homes of high quality, high finish and good products and good engineering and so on. And it took a long time for that to shift. Perhaps Japan was the first country outside of Europe and the Americas to have that stamp when they started making their autos post-World War II. And after that happened, it's taken a long time. China has been low quality, South Korea has been cheap, India has got clubbed into that, and other elements such as low labor prices, cheap labor, low ethics in business, all that we've got clubbed together with other Asian counterparts. So what we need to do is to break out of that, and Richard does give us some hints on how Indian brands can get out of that.
Also, Anant, when we have a global brand coming to India, for example, KFC, they often modify their offerings to suit the Indian taste. So do we have enough Indian brands globalizing their services and products?
No, I think we haven't quite reached that stage yet, where I think phase 1 is to get consumers to sample and trust Indian brands. One of the things that, again, Richard covers in his talk is causes, beliefs, movements, and so on and so forth. Brands have to take a stand. The reputation of Indian talent actually goes back many, many years. We've had the IT has boomed, certainly. You had Silicon Valley. You look at the number of India-educated CEOs in the tech environment in the US is massive. The bigger worry certainly is whether Indian brands will be able to face up to the new challenge of standing up on issues, taking a position on issues, brands standing for something other than the product itself. So do you stand for women? Do you stand for human rights? Do you stand for upliftment of the poor? What do you stand for beyond your product or service?
Absolutely. I think there is an opportunity, and the report does suggest that brands need to elevate, engage and lead. So here's the conversation. Let's get ready to melt with Richard Edelman. And that was the conversation with Richard Edelman. Anant, what can marketers learn from this conversation?
I think, I've been a follower of the Edelman Trust Barometer report from the time I got into writing about advertising. And I think there's never been a time that the report is more relevant than the report we saw just now. And fundamentally, it's because the dynamics have changed. For example, why they're doing this deep dive into business is because there's never been a situation where business is the most trusted of the pillars. So business is so important And I think every company, every CMO, every CEO needs to look at the report and say, hey, what can I do in this changing world?
All right. So I think there's a lot to learn, a lot to take away. So here's presenting the MELT cheat sheet. And that's a wrap on this edition of MELT. I'll see you next week, same time, same place. You can also watch all our content on our social media platforms. Next week, we'll be speaking to Siddharth Banerjee from Vodafone.